it's hard to believe I've been doing this for so long. It's all the way back in '81, I started getting my feet wet as an investor. And it was a lot more than that. I dove head first, and within 30 days, I quit my full-time job to do it full-time. It was, we'll talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about 2020 lessons learned. And also I want to, what Kurt said is really important, have a vision of what you want to accomplish. I'd like to talk a little bit about that and talk about why goal setting and being so specific about goals really has changed my life completely. So you implement that into the house buying business, it's a big deal. Talk about charts, of course. And one of the questions I'd like to answer tonight, because I had to really think about this, is why did we have price increases in 2020 and not 2019? We had great set of charts in 2019 and prices did virtually nothing. So I found it very interesting why 2020 cranked and why 2019 did not. And we'll also talk about what you probably should maybe do in 2021 to be successful. So thank you for the invitation. Some of the lessons that you learn whenever you have a bad time, and if you've been doing this for as long as I have, you have had some bad times, but 2020 was unlike anything I've ever seen. So one lesson you probably learn is have reserves. There are a lot of people that got caught short very quickly, and you realize that having some savings to where I'm kind of odd this way in the way I pay bills. When I get my bills, even like your gas bill, your water bill at your home, I pay it a year in advance, and so I get credits until it goes down to zero. And where's that coming from? Lessons learned about having reserves. I want to have plenty of time before I have an issue. The other thing you might want to really concentrate on, if you haven't done it, is solve monthly income. There's a really great feeling that happens when you have monthly income coming in automatically that provides you with your livelihood. Your stress level goes down and your eyes kind of open up to opportunities. And that's a big thing to get out of the way. And sometimes you can't do it in California because the prices are too high. And so I always mention that some people have been buying out of state, and that can be a very wise idea. What 2020 taught you some is learning how to cope with surprises. And whenever I get one of those, I immediately go to solution mode right away. And this is probably from experience. When you invest in properties and you flipped over 1,500 houses, you run into your share of problems. One problem I had is I built a house on a lot I didn't own. Oops, that's a big one, okay? I went to solution mode right away on that and door knocked the guys who actually owned the lot and eventually bought it from him. But instead of freaking out, that's what I've taught myself to do, is go to solution mode right away, and it helps. It'll help you solve things a lot quicker, and you're going to spend your energy in a positive way. Looking at 2021, I want to start with some idea about what it is that you want to accomplish. Just at the same time I got in this business in late 1980, November of 1980, I met this man. I was forced to go to a seminar by the guy I worked for in the property buying business. And he said, there's a 3-hour seminar that we have to go to. Jim Rohn is holding on. And I really didn't want to go. That's the honest truth. I'd never been to a seminar. 3 hours sounded like a very long time to sit in one place. I was not excited. Within about 5 minutes, I wrote my first note at the seminar. It was at the top of the page, and I wrote it to the person that was with me, and I said, this guy doesn't need our money. And I was really impressed with that. And I always look at people's agenda. You know, why did you write this book? Why are you speaking about what you're speaking about? And I got the idea that his agenda was pretty pure. In other words, he had had some problems starting out as a young adult, and he had figured out what changed his life, and he got a kick out of sharing it. And I loved it, and he got me. And so that night I took many pages of notes, and when I got home, one of the things that he encouraged me to do was to have a written set of goals. And so I spent most of the night, all night, thinking about what I wanted in the different categories, and wrote some major goals for my life. And one of the things that you find about yourself is it helps to have a why. You know, why are you going to do certain things? And I've been very fortunate in my life to have Marcia, my wife, and Sandy is my wife now. They're very motivating to me. When they want something, they don't even have to like say it that directly. It goes on my goal list. It just automatically does. So I'm going to share with you something that happened one day. My wife, Marcia, came home from a meeting at a church meeting at somebody's home. And she was bragging about the house and kept on bragging about it. I said, well, it's not as nice as our home, is it? Because we had bought a home and fixed it. It was a 5-bedroom, 2-story house, and it was where the college professors lived. And so my ego got a little bruised, and she said, well, Bruce, it's a custom home. So, oh, well, guess what went on my list for the first time? A custom home lot. I wrote it as if I already owned it. Now, how long did it take me to get that custom home lot? It was the next day by noon. That's no joke. Now, isn't it amazing? I bet that lot had been around before that day, but I wasn't looking for it. And it really made me think, wow, what else could be on my goal list that could be mine if I only was looking for it? It was an astonishing thing. We lived in that home for 25 plus years, and building that was a very big deal to me because it was a kind of a culmination. When I had first gotten started, I had a very rough start working for other people. And now I'm building a custom home. And one of the moments that stood out for me was the guys were finishing off the kitchen and they didn't know I was on the other side of the wall in the dining room doing something. And they said, I wonder what this guy does. Because now I was living where the doctors lived and I was 34 years old and they were just trying to think, what does this guy do? And that was so exciting to me because what I was doing was something I was really passionate about and never imagined that I would get to do this stuff. You also have to find out what motivates you. I love having people that are in my life that I love and I can pursue things that they're excited about. But I also know for myself, I have to get ticked off. I'm best when I'm mad at something. I'll give you an example. Played a reasonable good game of racquetball, and I broke an Achilles tendon in 1986. A couple of days after I ruptured it, I came back on crutches, and best player at the club was a semi-pro player. He looked at me and said, what happened to you? I said, I ruptured an Achilles. You know what he said? He says, oh, good, that's the end of you. And I just thought, what a stupid thing to say. And I wrote that down. His name was Daggert. And I remember his name because I read it morning and night. Daggert's challenge, you will not be back. Well, guess what? 6 months later, I walked into the challenge court a little just before he always came in the morning and I was warming up. And he came in, challenge courts are clear glass. He opened up the side glass door. He looked in. I said, are you here for real? And I said, I'm here for you. He had no idea how motivating what he said was to me. He's the reason I was on that court 6 months and not never. So that's pretty exciting. That's what I learned from Jim Rohn, man. Have some goals and know what you're going for. There's some examples of people having some goals that impacted other people because they convinced them that maybe the dream was actually real. This is Jim Valvano. Jim Valvano coached NC State basketball. He took the place of a coach named Sloan, and Sloan was a revered coach. The best basketball players in high school wanted to go play for Sloan. And so if they got scholarships there, it was great because that's their dream. And then Sloan quit, went to another college. So these guys were disappointed. And Valvano comes in a very, very strange way. Here's the first basketball practice. You think at basketball practice, you have basketballs, right? That would make sense. Well, not this one. So what did he have? He had a ladder underneath the basket where the net was and a pair of scissors, gold scissors. And they spent the entire practice time recutting down the nets and swinging them over the head. I kid you not. What do you do? And when do you actually do that in college basketball? When you win the NCAA championship. He told them their destiny 3 years later when they were seniors was together they would swing the nets around there, and they did it. One of the most unbelievable documentaries you can watch is watch Jim Valvano's team, NC State, win their title and have to win 10 games in a row under ridiculous circumstances, but they did it. That's the power of believing in a goal in advance. This is one of my favorite athletes, George Foreman. George Foreman was a terror in his early 20s, heavyweight champion. And he retired very early at I think it was 28 years old. And he went to take care of, he owned a boys club, and for the next 10 years, that's what he did. And at 38, he was kind of running out of money, and he started thinking, okay, wow, what do I do to keep this going? And he thought, the only thing I know how to do is go back to boxing. And so a much older, heavier version of George Foreman went back to boxing at age 38. And he was a big joke until he knocked out 28 straight people. And he got to fight Evander Holyfield for the heavyweight championship. And in that fight, he put up a great fight, but he lost the decision. And in the interview, the announcer was very complimentary. He said, George, you put up a heck of a fight. And to that, Foreman said something that had caught my attention. He says, I didn't come here to put up a great fight. I came here to get my title back, so I'm not very happy. And I thought, wow, that was pretty intense. Well, I have a friend named John Stevenson who has an amazing thing that he does for himself every year. It's called his top 10 list. His top 10 list is the 10 most important things he wants to do that year that are fun. And I don't have such a list, but he does. So what did he want to do? He wanted to go see a heavyweight title fight. He invited me up, calls me, he says, you want to go see Foreman fight Michael Moorer? Oh my gosh, yes. Well, guess what? He has ringside seats, and we go watch this fight. The crowd is so into it. They're cheering as loud as you could possibly cheer. And by the way, Foreman loses the first 9 rounds. In the 10th round, he hits Moorer with a right hand. I look at my friend, I said, Moorer's hurt. Next punch, lights out. Foreman's champion again. He gets to his knees and prays in the corner. A few minutes later, the same announcer right in front of me interviews George Foreman. And he says, well, George, you have got to be proud of yourself tonight. You got your title back. And I was thinking, I wonder what's going to come out of Foreman's mouth. I mean, this is your night, pal. You've got like the biggest title in sports back at your age. I didn't know what he was going to say, but I could never have dreamed up what he did say. He said, it's not so important I got my title back. What is important is I live in a country that will let you pursue your dreams until you get what you came for. And I cried when I heard it, and it's hard for me to tell the story without tearing up right now, because I just thought, wow, what a gift he just gave people, because that's in fact what we do. Is we have a blessing living in this country. Why the house buying business is so special to me. I didn't start out knocking them dead, not in the house buying business rather, but in life. I got married very young, and I had a really hard time acclimating myself working for people. And I got fired 5 times in a row. And after you get fired 5 times in a row, you know what you do during your lunch breaks? You look at want ads, because you know that you're going to get fired inside of a few months. That was what I look forward to, is another new job. And I kind of had my first mentor at that point. A guy that worked in the hardware store motivated me by ticking me off. And once again, it worked and changed my entire life. And so I got to work for an electrical sales company for a few years. And somebody that knew me said, you know what? Why don't you come with me, and I'm going to show you the ropes on how to buy houses. I think you might be able to do this pretty well. So he went to see somebody that was in foreclosure that had called on his ad. And we went in the house, and in about 10 minutes, we got thrown out because the lady was upset. Now, in that 10 minutes, I didn't say anything, but I observed, and I was from the sales world. So I had observed that the lady said yes to the offer, and he didn't catch it, and we got booted out because she got upset in a little while. When we got back to the car, I said, let me knock on the door, get us back in. I think you'll buy the house. And that's what happened. And on the way home that night, I thought, wow, isn't that interesting that I picked up even though I was from a different sales world, I picked up that this lady would have sold her home. So I hurried and got my real estate license. And you could do that in a weekend. I took the Lumblow course on Saturday, Sunday, passed the test. I literally had my license that fast. I went and applied for the job. And the owner of the company looked at me, he said, how long have you had your license? I said, 1 day. And he actually laughed in my face and said, yeah. He said, this is no place for an inexperienced agent. And I would suppose for most people, that's the end of the interview, but I wasn't there to apply for a job. I was there to change my whole financial life, and I knew it. And I wasn't going to let it slide. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. And by the way, that's what I always ask. I always say that statement. And by the way, I never know what's going to come out of my mouth, but it buys me, what, 2 seconds? And the best stuff in my life has come after that statement. So I said, isn't the bottom line around here whether you can buy properties for a profit or not? The owner of that company looked at me and says, yep. I said, you'll know in 30 days, I will be able to do it better than anybody you have. And you know what? I bet in his mind, he thought, what do I have to lose? And this guy just passed the first test. He doesn't take no easily. And so I got the job. And in the first 30 days of being in the business, I bought 10 houses. And I earned a year's worth of money on commission in 1 month, in my first month. And I was, in fact, the best buyer in the company. Now, what's really interesting is I didn't know what I was doing. I really didn't. But why did it happen? I recognized the potential of a life-changing event. This business has that potential. I worked hard. There was a lot at stake. I called about 100 people a day about a subject I didn't know much about. And I never faked that I knew something that I didn't, which was a big help, because you can learn a lot by honestly telling people, I don't know what you just said. And they'll take time and explain it to you. But instead of concentrating on what I didn't know, I concentrated on what I did know. And I understood really quickly what we brought to the marketplace as cash buyers. It was an easy sale. It was cash. It was quick close. There was no repairs, no long escrows. I got it. You know, before CarMax, I mean, for cars, we were CarMax for houses. And I understood it and I could sell it. I also had no idea I wasn't supposed to do some things. When I was too late to call, I would write blind offers. And one of the offers I wrote was on 5 or 6 custom homes that were being built and finished and just sitting there in a city called Grand Terrace. And they were listed at about 240, and I offered 120. No one told me you weren't supposed to do that it would tick off the world, or they didn't tell me that. So I wrote the offer. And guess what happened? The builder accepted. I'm getting a lot of feedback, by the way. Somebody's mic is open. So I got a chance to buy new houses. And the first thing that dawned on him is, and he's been in the business, he didn't know anybody would sell new houses at a discount. Everything that he was buying was junky and had to be fixed, and it was in bad areas. And all of a sudden I'm buying new houses. It just blew his mind. Now, I'm also in escrow. Now I have 10 escrows in 30 days, and I have about 30-day escrow. So I'm about to get paid, I think, at the end of a 30-day process. So I go into escrow on the 30th day, and I stand by the lady's desk. And when she gets off the phone, she's irritated. She looks at me and says, what do you want? And I said, I'm here to pick up my commission check. This is the 30th day of my 30-day escrow. And she says, pal, that's not how it works. Where you been? I need help. And so I found out that I had to participate in getting her stuff to get it closed. Okay. When the next day, when I came back and had all the stuff taken care of, and we actually had a closing, she was stapling my commission check to the paperwork, and the stapler didn't work. And honest to God, she took the stapler and threw it against the wall into a trash can. That was, my first thought was, I got 9 more escrows with this lady. So the next day, she had a brand new swing line stapler with a big bow and my business card. I didn't know real estate, but I understood people. I understand how to build a team. I wanted her to think when Bruce Norris shows up, he cares that I have a new stapler that works. And I never had trouble with escrows again. All that happened inside of a very short time period because I didn't doubt that it was going to be a life-changing event. And maybe because I got introduced to Jim Rohn and I had a set of goals that I pursued. One other key is hang around people who raise the bar in your life. In a very small way, there was another buyer at that time that worked for the company. At the time, he was the #1 buyer named Mike. And Mike came up to me the first day after I made all those calls. He said, I got to tell you, you're going to do really good at this business. Do yourself a favor. Don't talk to anyone else but me. All the rest of these guys think it's hard. And that was smart advice. I wanted to hang around people who thought it was possible, because in fact it was. And one of the goals that I wrote when I attended Jim Rohn's seminar back in 1980 in November was I wanted to be a black belt in karate. I had a brother, Dwight, who was a great black belt in karate. And I wanted that as a goal. And a couple of years later, I actually crossed the line through it because it was too big. It was not, I couldn't see myself there. And I met Sensei Palaiuso probably about 15 years ago. And I started training with him. And he's just a very influential person. And he has some favorite sayings, man. One more, one more rep, one more round, get knocked down, man, get up again. Always one more beyond what you thought you could do. And then at the end of the workout, he'd look at you and say, tomorrow we'll raise the bar a little. And you just are thinking, how many times can we raise the bar? You hang around somebody like that every day for a year, you are not the same person. So find somebody that ticks you off, that'll motivate you, and find somebody that inspires you to be somebody better than you thought you could be. And you will have a great 2021. So here's a to-do list. Create yourself a list of goals, get inspired, stay dedicated, and do some remarkable things. Okay, charts. Well, here's what's interesting about these charts. And I think what we're going to do is go circle and answer this question when we look at these. Affordability is one of the main things that I pay attention to at the end of a cycle for California. So peak prices came in 1980, 89. It should have come in 2005 when affordability hit 17%. When 17% is hit, what happens is a natural cause. There's very excited buyers that get told no by lenders if you're in a legitimate buying environment. In 2005 and 6, we didn't have a legitimate buying environment. So what happened is they got told yes, and affordability went down to 11%, and we paid a big price for that. We had gone so big in price that was not reasonable, and we gave a lot of it back very quickly. But what's interesting is when you have affordability that has a peak, let's say in 1996 at 40% and 98 at 40%, and you start gradually going down, it goes down pretty much until you get to 17%. And you're increasing in price the whole way. So it was really interesting, this cycle that we paused at about 30%. We bounced around that number for a long time. And why 2020 was exciting and 2019 wasn't is really baffling. So we'll take a look at 2019 and take a look at the charts that were in front of us. Affordability was very good. It was about 30 or 31%. So California had affordability in 2019. It had a median price that had gone up very little. And at the end of 2019, it had gone up very little again, something like 3%, with the best set of charts that I had seen in my life. Sales. Normally at the end of a boom cycle, you have 4 years of boom sales. It happened in the 70s, the 80s, the mid 2000s. It hadn't happened in 8 years after 2009, maybe 10 years, flat. So that was interesting. So you sort of started thinking, okay, well, what was the reasoning given for that? Well, there wasn't enough inventory. Okay, I never bought that, by the way, but that was the reason. Well, there's not enough inventory. That's why you can't have enough sales. Well, in 2020, sales went up 21% and inventory was down 45%. So I want you to think about that. Sales went up 21%, inventory was down by almost half, and you pulled off an increase in not only price, but in sales. That was interesting. This mix of foreclosure to regular sales and short sales to regular sales, when it gets to this ridiculous percentage, there's no impact on motivated sellers on the market. It's all of the stuff, and that's why your first thing that was mentioned in tonight's meeting was how hard it is to find deals. And by the way, I was in that market in 1981. The interest rates were high, but the prices were going up 15% a year. So it felt the same way. Everybody knew they had a piece of gold when you made an offer on it. It was very interesting. So the mix of sales in 2018, 2019, 2020 was virtually the same. You had no competition from motivated sellers and lender-owned property and short sales. So there was no reason for prices not to go up. Trustee sales were at the bottom. Unemployment, now we're back in 2019. Take a look at that chart. It goes all the way back to 1990. But if I took you back all the way to 1970, 2019 was the lowest unemployment. These are unemployment filings. I'm sorry, let me take a look at that. No, it says it's an interesting chart that we have. I think it says something that it's not. This is the unemployment rate. So we had a 50-year low unemployment rate in 2019. We had no foreclosures competing with normal sales. Really interesting why we didn't have price increases. The other interesting thing about this whole stretch since 2005 and 6, when we built a lot of homes, is that single family construction in California has never recovered. We're still building 60,000 homes. And if you think that's a lot, 60,000 homes were built in 1981 when interest rates were 17.5% for mortgages. So that's the level of construction we're building in California right now. So why did prices go up in 2020 and not 2019? And we're going to have a Q&A, so I'd love some feedback, but this is kind of where I've landed. I think you had urgency hit two groups simultaneously, and the coronavirus made that occur. So group one had their house listed and they pulled it when the coronavirus hit. So nearly 50% of California's listings got pulled. And why would you do that? Well, you don't want people going in your house. So the sellers hunkered down. And maybe during that same stretch, they had a chance to refi their mortgage if it was something that started with a 2. And maybe they refied it and said, you know what, we're just going to stay here. We're going to stay here for a while. That home just stayed off the shelf. Group 2 perhaps lived in an expensive area, maybe a crowded area, that now felt unsafe. And perhaps their employer said, you know what, we don't care if you come into work right now, and we don't even care if you live in the area, you can do it remotely. And well, they changed their location to maybe a safer place. If you sell a $2.5 million home in San Jose and you move to San Diego, you know what happens? You're not a very discriminating buyer, to be honest with you. You're just wanting to find one. And that's kind of what happened. The goal was to get to a safer place and not find a deal. And I think that urgency, along with the shortage of inventory, created a perfect storm for prices to explode. You basically dropped, let's say in the last few months of 2020, we started averaging close to 500,000 units a year. You drop that on inventory that's as low as this is, that's what's going to happen. Now, what's interesting is why didn't that happen in 2019? We didn't have the urgency. So kind of going forward, you have to really think, are we going to return to 2019? Or are we going to somehow maintain the urgency that we feel in 2020? And the answer is, I guess we're going to see. That is a really good question. But right now, if you have demand on top of this inventory, you're going to have some interesting pricing occur. So what's next for 2021? You could have, it's interesting. I read, okay, we have all the vaccines, and then I read, okay, maybe we're going to require 2 masks. So I'm not sure where that's headed. I'm not sure if we're going to have another round of shutdowns. We had a very contested presidential election that's left some hard feelings on both sides. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in society. We also have new policies that could explode debt and raise taxes. So there's a lot of unknowns going into 2021. One thing that's probably you've heard that maybe we're going to have another big increase in trustee sales. So you have forbearance of many loans. Matter of fact, 2008, look at that foreclosure chart. We now have more 90-day delinquencies in 2020 than we did in 2008. That's an interesting thing to think about. So the delinquencies that created 2008 chart exist right now, but there's a moratorium on doing anything about it. So it'll be interesting to see what that creates. Why this is important, by the way, the level of foreclosures that enter the market dictate price damage. Let me see if I can go back to that other chart. When you know this, you get a smile on your face when you see this chart. Go back to 2009, January, look at the mix of sales. 60% REOs, 10% short sales, 70% of the market was not sold by an owner, but a lender or a lender that was trying not to get something back. That also means that 70% of the sales didn't bring forward a buyer for another house. That was a lender that got rid of something, but a buyer didn't get rid of it. They were incapable now. So every sale, 70% of the sales took away that buyer maybe for years. So that's a big deal. So this foreclosure mix is important. If I fly into Florida, let's say, and in 2015, I see this chart and it's where we were in 2009. And by the way, I was going to interview Doug Duncan on a radio show. And I did some preparation for that interview. And so I read their quarterly report, last quarter of 2014. And in that report, it said that Florida was responsible for 25% of Fannie Mae's losses in 2014. And I thought, wow, how could that be? And then I looked at the foreclosure time period and it was over 4 years. They were still back in 2010 at the end of 2014. And this was their mix of sales. And I got a big smile on my face because I went shopping for the exact right inventory. And it's called building lots. You weren't going to sell building lots in California or in Florida at the time when foreclosures are peak. And so I used charts to tell me what to do and when to do it. So I bought building lots right after that interview that I would ultimately build my rental portfolio on, and got them for a song because no one else wanted building lots. So that's what I use charts for. I use them because I understand what it means and what it does to the inventory. So we have some unknowns. We don't know if lenders are going to foreclose on this pile of late people, but the 90-day lates are as big in 2021 as they were in 2008. We have an unemployment number that seems to be improving. The problem is that I'm not sure I buy it. So one of my concerns is this number is not adding in the people that have stopped looking for jobs. If you're in the restaurant business and the restaurant business is down by a certain percentage of restaurants, that's what you do. If you're a waitress, you're probably not looking. that number is probably in excess of 10 or 11% for sure. So it'll be interesting to see the jobs that come back and the jobs that don't in 2021. So what's certain about 2021? That there will be opportunities for those people that are prepared. That is always true. There will always be motivated sellers. There will always be inventory that they got maybe through a probate. They don't have any cost. There will always be a home that has repairs that are so great that the owner is incapable of making them, incapable of fixing them. There will always be houses that if you look at them and say, you know what, I can design this and add a bedroom or add an ADU on the back, then I can make a profit. What happens in this cycle without foreclosures is that you're almost always talking to an owner that has a house. So that's just what happens. When you have foreclosures that go way up, so if that occurs, then your conversation will change. Your conversation will change to people that control inventory. I'm not sure that's going to occur, but that'll be a lender's decision as soon as the moratorium is left, or as soon as the moratorium is up. We'll see what the people do with the people that are late. So there'll be opportunities in 2021. You just have to do some things that are profitable in California. I always get asked the reasons why I moved a lot of my assets to Florida. I like their business model, to be honest with you. It's take care of people that are growing older. And what that does is ensure migration of people in the medical field. So it's very interesting to see how the population gains in Florida differ from California. This is a chart of population gain in Florida. And if you look at the percentages, 85% of the population gain is in the migration category. In California, none of the population gain is from migration. 100% now of California's population gain is birth over death. So the only population you're gaining in California is a baby that's a day old that can't rent a house and can't buy one. And I know it sounds contradictory because we've had such a tremendous price increase. It's not because of new demand coming into the state. And it'll be very interesting to see how long it lasts, to be honest with you. But I like Florida's business model because every year they get an influx of adults that decide to live there. And it represents 85% of the population gain. So I like being there for that reason. When I built the homes that I built, I thought that I would probably rent to seniors that did not want to live in, I built them close to a place called the Villages, which is sort of a contained community where people ride around their golf carts and do all their stuff. And I thought probably my renter is going to be a senior that doesn't want to have that exact lifestyle. And who my renter is the nurse that takes care of the senior in the Villages. And that surprised me, but almost 100% of my renters connected to the medical field. And that is not going to discontinue, because when you're 65, reports I've read, when you're 65, you have 2 medical people in your life. When you're 85, you have 7. That's a very big migration pile of caretakers or medical people that are going to show up in Florida in the next 20 years. And that's a very safe business model to me. You have a lot of wealth that's coming into Florida, and you have a very affordable cost to live in Florida, not just the homes, but there's a lot of things that are just cost less. One of the things that I became uncomfortable with in California is I was no longer sure that I understood the rules of engagement. I felt that rules and laws could change at the whim of the elected. And it made me feel very uncomfortable. We had an election one year where we voted against rent control. And then the next year we had rent control. And I thought, well, how did that happen? So we had a seminar and we had a group of legislators on a panel that we got to ask. And I found out that laws get passed a number of different ways. Vote of the people, vote of the legislators, and sometimes it can get proclamated into existence by the governor under emergency circumstances. And so when I started to realize that, okay, I do not know how the rules are going to change because I don't even get a say, that's when I became concerned and when some of my assets started leaving and going to Florida. I don't mind the no taxes, but if you live there, there's a lot of other things that cost less. So I'm excited to be there. And it's not that I dislike California, but I just as an investor became concerned. Another thing that's obvious is when you're dealing with the construction of new homes is there's evidence of growth everywhere, and you actually get cooperated with by the building department. It feels very different. People want you to do that in Florida. We interviewed the president of the National Builders Association probably a year or so ago on the radio show. And I asked him, what's the difference between building a tract of homes in Texas or California? And this was his honest answer. He said, in Texas, you have to ask yourself, what's the economy going to be like next year? In California, you have to ask this question, what's the economy going to be like in 15 years? And he wasn't kidding. And I know for a fact, the gentleman that I mentioned, the karate instructor, Mr. Paliuso, had 3,000 acres of land that went pending on an offer, like an option for 10 years. 10 years, a developer released $250,000 of option money trying to get a tract built. It never was told yes. That's how long it takes to get a yes answer. That's problematic. That's why in the middle of this boom, California is building 60,000 single family houses and not 160. So that's just one, some of the reasons why I'm not here. If you're an investor and 2020 feels a little exuberant, and maybe it is going to get that way, here's some things that I wouldn't be excited about holding on to. What gets hurt at the end of cycles are land, building lots, very expensive homes for your area, inventory that has a small audience. So when you have cycle changes and you hold the wrong inventory, you don't get to sell it very quickly. And sometimes you don't get to sell it at all. Can you have land completely worthless in California? You sure can. About 2009, 2010, we did a mailer just to get some reaction to people that had land. I wanted to see maybe if I could tie some up at a really low price. There was a guy that called me, had 30 acres of land. He went on and on for about 10 minutes and how wonderful it was. And when he paused, I said, to be honest with you, I can't pencil any value in the land that you own. And there was a little pause and he says, yeah, I know. So he had held on to something that was past its expiration date. That's called quadrant 2 in our education system. That's when prices go down. And so when prices go down, I instinctively know what to look for, the type of inventory to buy. But we're in quadrant 4 in California where prices explode and everything sells. And you could get lulled into sleep thinking that this is going to go on forever, and it doesn't. So just be careful if you have marginal inventory, remote areas. Not everybody wants that inventory when things change. And so you got to be careful about that. Some creative profit centers in 2020, ADUs. Aaron has created a lot of education about ADUs. He's been involved with the senator and interviewed the senator that created the legislation. Out-of-state holding of rentals is a good idea. I picked Florida for specific reasons. Building new homes for spec is another niche that works in quadrant 4. Instead of trying to find some existing properties, you build something. Adding square footage to existing homes. And An opportunity zone, if you're interested in something like that, that's a little bit outside of the scope of what we cover, because when we checked out opportunity zones, there were so many questions that they hadn't answered yet. So still concerned about opportunity zones, but there's opportunities in 2020. You just have to make sure you don't get stuck with a project that only has one solution. And by that, I mean just like one of those things that if you can't sell it, you're in trouble. So be careful about getting inventory that has a very small group of buyers that are capable of buying it, or a product type that has only a very small group of people that would be interested in it, like land or lots. That's where you get hurt, okay? I'd be more than happy to be open to questions now, if that's what you guys would like to do.
Yeah, guys, so if you've got a question, go ahead and put it in the chat box. Bruce, can you see the chat box, or do you want me to read some of the questions for you?
Yeah, I'll let you read them. That's great.
Okay. Somebody asked about Florida. Is Florida generally appealing for demographics of aging, or specifically, or is that specific, I think, to the villages?
No, that's all over Florida. That's Florida's main business plan is to welcome the seniors and let them have fun, and also care for them medically. That's a big deal. And so, no, that's everywhere. That's the villages just happens to be the largest, like John Burns, I don't know if you know that name, but he's basically the guy that gives advice to the national builders and the hedge funds. And he made a list of 100 of the top developments, and number one development in the country is the villages for number of units. Where I decided to buy is called Lakewood Ranch. That's a different part of Florida. It's by Sarasota, and that's the number 2 development in the nation. So by luck, I have my rentals in the number 1 and my residents in the number 2.
There you go. Somebody else pointed out that the tax advantage has got to be another thing that would draw aging population.
Well, not
Florida.
just that, yeah, not just aging population, and especially if they decide to raise some taxes. There's going to be some point, if you're making some serious money, that you go, wow, that is a lot of money I'm donating to the state of California. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it certainly is. It wasn't the reason, but it's a bonus chip. How's that?
For sure. Somebody was asking about adding square footage and the length of time it takes to get permits and expense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big concern when you're dealing with California and going through that process. Late in what we call quadrant 4, which is where prices go up, you could get stuck with a timing problem with that. So you could start out with a project that's perfectly acceptable and take so long that it is not even feasible. So it's a good point that you got to be careful about having long range projects that have worked up until now, but can stop working. And once you cross over from quadrant 4 to quadrant 1, where prices have stopped going up and they're flat, and before you have, let's say, a glut of foreclosures, people's buying habits change. I give you an example. In 1988, I bought 50 building lots in Palm Springs on lease land. And the market was so hot, we sold those inside of a 6-month time period and made over $1 million on those lots. 2 years later, I have built 5 custom homes on lease land. Now, what was interesting, when I was selling the 80 lots and it was on lease land, and I would tell people, well, it's on lease land, the buyer said, oh, well, the lease is long enough, I'm not even going to be around when it ends. They were rationalizing why lease land was not a big deal. They didn't own the land, okay? That's what lease land is. Well, that didn't bother anybody in 1988. In 1990, I've got 5 custom homes for sale, and people would come in, the few people that were actually looking at houses in 1990, and I can tell you there were very few. And their first question was, is this on lease land? Oh, no, we would never consider that. And I just thought, wow, 2 years ago, it didn't matter at all. And 2 years later, it was all of it, everything. It was not going to sell. So that crossing over is a very big deal. When you cross over from quadrant 4, where prices are going up, to quadrant 1, where it's stalled, there's a big hesitation all of a sudden. And when you get to where prices start to go down, they usually accelerate, because what happens is these foreclosures mix more and more into the inventory. And so you just got to be careful. That's why there's a lot of unknowns going forward. If the policy is to aggressively foreclose on people and that ratio gets too high, well, there's a history in that. That takes prices out. I don't know that that's going to be their attitude, but I'm just saying it's an unknown. So you have to weigh any long-term project right now and any spec in land. Land, by the way, right now is hotter than a firecracker.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's completely not. It's very interesting.
Yeah. One thing I would add to that is, like, just people should pay attention to their cities or their specific county. For example, like if you're going to build in Los Angeles County, if you're in the actual county, it can take 4+ months to go through the planning process, where there's other places like the actual city of Los Angeles, where sometimes you can pay expedited fees and can shorten it down to a couple of weeks to get approvals. So I think that kind of stuff, you definitely want to talk to your building and safety departments in order to understand those timeframes, because 4 months versus 3 weeks is a pretty big deal when you have a hard money loan.
Yeah, it's a huge deal.
So somebody asked a question about inflation risks, and they said QE5 now. What are your thoughts about inflation?
I'm studying it. I am definitely studying it. We interviewed Doug Duncan a couple of weeks ago. He's the chief economist of Fannie Mae again. So I just interviewed him again. It was very interesting that I went to the website once again to prepare for the interview, and they had a projection of GDP growth. Now let's go back to the beginning of 2020. They had a projection for 2021. The GDP growth was going to be at 2%. So January 2020, they're projecting GDP growth of 2021 at 2%. Now go to January of 2021. What's the projection for this year?
I don't know.
5.1. 5.1.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
Oh,
difference.
wow. Well, that's really interesting. That was one of those aha moments for me. We're doing a timing seminar starting on Saturday, and that one interview really made me think about the ramifications of that. And I started to think about, I pulled a chart of GDP growth for the last 50 years to kind of put that into context of how strong a GDP growth that is. So this is a really smart guy that's saying this in a national setting, that's the projected GDP growth for 2021. And I wasn't prepared for that. And it really gave me some thought. So you're basically going to have the strongest GDP growth in 50 years on top of the interest rate that's not going to change by the Fed. And you're going to put in 1.9 trillion extra dollars into a $21.4 trillion economy. So where does the GDP growth come from?
I don't know where.
Yeah, it's borrowed money.
Borrowed money. Yeah.
It's debt. So it's interesting. So the answer to your question that I still am going to think about is, yeah, you can have inflation. You just have to pour money into an economy. Well, we already know that, there's a lot of dollars chasing lumber right now. So what happens to prices? Well, that's inflation. So if you want to pour $1.9 trillion into an economy, there's a good chance some of that's going to get spent that was never going to be around before. If you find ways to keep doing that, the problem with that is at some point that you pay a very big price for that. So that's, to be honest with you, that's one of the reasons why, you know, we do timing reports. We have for a long time. This year, the one we're doing is in 4 quarters. We're doing one every quarter. So because there's a lot of unknowns that are going to play out. And so I want to see this play out, but it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
By the way, before I read that, I would have landed on that we would probably be preventing deflation this year. That's
5% growth. That's like almost Chinese growth. They have had throw out big numbers like that over the last. That's a big number.
Yeah, too bad it's not real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when you were giving your talks a number of years ago. One of the big things that was a question as to what's going to happen in the future was government intervention, and we're definitely seeing a lot of government intervention that's impacting these things.
Well, that's why when you ask somebody, well, what's next? Well, it depends. It depends on what artificial stimulus is going to continue or get created or stop. So how do you answer that question? I mean, it's just, what's interesting, and this is going to be a book, and I don't remember the name of it off my head, but Ray Dalio is a really smart guy. Do you know the name?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, he's writing a book right now, and he's been releasing it a chapter at a time. It is the most difficult read I've ever undertaken. But basically kind of what it amounts to is that he's talking about like a 500 or 600 year history of how countries that have like the dollar and what used to be the pound or the Dutch, you know, how you lose reserve currency status. And so that's what that book is about. And I believe he thinks that we're on the path to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that mentioned. So let's see. What are some of the other questions? What quadrant is Florida in right now?
Oh, it's quadrant 4, just like probably most of the United States, off to the races and prices going up. I guess the nice thing about Florida for me is that it's still at a pretty reasonable level. And, you know, it's about half or less than half of the median price of California. So it tracks migration. And that's, you know, people move here so they can actually afford buy a house.
Mm-hmm.
That's I'm very comfortable and confident with the next 10 or 20 years in Florida, to be honest with you, because of what I know occurs when seniors show up. It creates other growth that far outnumber the seniors eventually, which is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
If you have 2 caretakers or people in the medical field at 65 and 7 when you're 85, that's a 350% increase of human beings that show up to take care of the seniors. That's a remarkable statement.
And eventually they'll become seniors, and then 7
right.
more people are going to have to support them. All right. Sean, well, actually, Connie asked a question, and I've had somebody pose this before. With forbearance, people, the loan balance gets pushed to the end of the loan, right? So when these laws that are in place that are allowing people to not pay their mortgages, when we come out of that, isn't the loan balance going to move to the back end of the loan versus putting somebody in a place of foreclosure? What are your thoughts about that being a difference between 2008 and today?
I think that would be a very reasonable decision to do. So I don't doubt that would be the decision. It depends on policy. See, once again, there was a policy in, say, 1996. If you look at trustee sale charts, they almost always go in one direction forever. So I'm going to go back to that chart real quick, okay? So trustee sale charts go up and up or down. The only year it didn't, look at that, is 1995. What happened in 1995 is lenders were losing so much money that they stopped foreclosing on stuff at the same pace that they were. And there was a law passed by Fannie and Freddie that you had to initiate foreclosure in 100 days. And so that's why the numbers went back up. So what's interesting is what you're saying makes perfect sense. Let's just tack that number at the end of the loan balance, and we'll call it a day. That would be a pretty sane thing to do. Does it mean that's what they will do? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Probably, but I don't know. They in the past have done just the opposite. And lenders didn't have any such dictate in 2008. They did it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
They just chased it and foreclosed on it and lost a ton of dough.
Mm-hmm. And certainly people who have lost their jobs, that's not going to fix the problem. They're not going to be able to pay those bills. Sean asked a question, if you have an opinion on the Texas market in 2020. I'm not sure how keyed in on that you are.
You know, well, I can tell you that of the two out of 50 states that are going to get migration of every type, Texas and Florida. So the thing I hesitate about Texas is its very big dependence on the oil industry at this point. There are some places that have a lot of oil business that if that's going to be curtailed in some way, that'll have an impact. Texas taxes on real estate very high. So they don't have a state tax, but they have about 2.5 to 3.5 in real estate property tax. So that's pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
But they have places like Austin that are getting migration of tech companies. So, you know, that's a different question. If you go to Houston, if that's oil based, then that's a different answer.
Mm-hmm. Carl was asking whether you feel that condos are a type of inventory that should be exited in California.
Well, in the past, what happens is condos get very popular toward the end of cycles. Is that what they want to buy? No, but they can't afford the house. And so they buy a condo. 2 years after that excitement drains, have yourself a two-story condo. I'll give you an example. So when Greg, my son, was buying at Trustee Sales, this was probably 2009, 2010, we bought a two-story condo in Corona in a senior area, okay? Well, we got to keep that one as a rental for quite some time, which was fine, but that was exactly what was popular in 2006 and 7. In other words, a senior rationalized, hey, it's what I can afford, I love it. And in 2010, you could not give it away because they really didn't want to climb 2 stairs. You know, they didn't want to climb upstairs and go to the 2nd story. So the mood changed to that inventory. So no, people would not rather have a condo. They would rather have a single family home. And if you get into quadrant 2, where you have price damage, those differences matter. I'll give you just an example. These are, you know, things that I've tested in front of an audience. So a couple hundred people in an audience, I'll say really participate this because it'll be helpful for investors to understand. How many of you guys want, when you pick a house, how many of you guys want a 2-story house? That's your preference. And so, I mean, I've gotten their attention. I think most of them are participating. Never more than 10 of 200 raise their hand. That's 5%. I said, now let's add a pool in the back. How many of you guys still want it? And then half of those. So think about that. So if you're a flipper and you say, well, it's no problem. I've got a 2-story house with a pool. And I basically just tested and says 95% of the audience doesn't want it. And you're in a market like 2010, don't kid yourself. You're going to have a problem. So leased land falls into that category. Pool homes might fall under that category. Less people want them. So that's what you have to say. You know what? I'm going to stay with inventory that's safe. Everybody wants it. In 2020, does it matter? No. It can be on a dirt road. You could have, it could be a mobile home on leased land. It won't matter.
As long as you accept the offer, it's good.
That's right.
All right. So the magic question that a bunch of people asked in different words: when do you anticipate the next real estate downturn?
The answer is, honestly, I'm going to figure that out during this year, because right now it's unknowable. I do not know the policies that will drive that. And that's the honest answer. So that's what this year is about. When we talk about, creating 4 presentations that are basically, usually I do an 8-hour timing event. I'm going to do a fourth of that over the course of, 4 times this year. But each of those times will be kind of a direct hit on what's occurred in the past 3 months. So basically, I don't think anybody could tell you. Do you have access to CARS presentations by any chance?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, it'll be interesting. Pull up CARS if you can, get somebody to do it for you. CARS presentation about their projections for prices in 2021. So that's what you're basically asking me to do. So here's what they have. They have 2 scenarios. So right now we're at, December's price was 717, but the annual number was about 656, something like that. Their projection is either 680-ish or 530-ish.
That's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, depending.
Yeah.
I think they've got it exactly right, depending. So we have to pay attention to policies, and then maybe that answer will emerge. You also have to think about, why didn't 2019 boom? The best charts I've ever seen. And by the way, with certainty, right? We didn't go into 2020 thinking anything bad was going to happen. 2019 had the greatest set of charts and no price movement. And almost you thought, wow, maybe we have what I would call incapable demand. People want them, but they can't get a yes answer from a lender. So I didn't ever buy that there wasn't enough inventory, because I know when people want inventory bad enough, it gets bought because they keep raising prices until the seller says yes. But somehow we managed to get, in the last 3 months, an average of, on a yearly basis, 500,000 sales off of inventory that was down by 50%. That is urgent demand. So urgency trumped what happened in 2019. It was like a casual approach to buying real estate. And all of a sudden that got bumped up to, I got to have one. So it depends who shows up in 2021. If the coronavirus stops and that quits causing a problem, does that take away the urgency? It might.
Somebody asked a question about deflation coming first or inflation. I think you kind of touched a little bit on that. You thought,
well, I thought it was a great question until I interviewed Doug Duncan. Really respected economist with a lot of eyeballs looking at his projections. So that was a little bit of a game changer for me that he would say that.
Yeah, that's definitely not necessarily what I would have thought either.
Yeah, but see, you weren't considering the artificial nature of that growth.
Yeah.
If you're just thinking, okay, what is the economy going to do? You have the right thing, you have the right answer. But take a $21.4 trillion and let's say divide 1.9 trillion by 21.4 trillion. It's like 9% of GDP growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to have a big impact.
Yeah, so you could do that every year and have yourself inflation, right? We'll just go $2 trillion in debt more every year. If that's your plan, you can create inflation.
Mhm.
If that's your plan.
Well, and I've also heard the Fed talk about how they're wanting to increase the level of inflation, that it's been low. That's like an expressed goal that they're trying to do. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, when you're in debt by the amount of debt we have, you would like to pay back that debt in cheaper dollars if you could.
yeah. Yeah. Hey, if you could pull that lever, that makes a lot of sense.
What's really interesting about all this, you know, the Fed balance sheet now is crazy.
Yeah.
And the last time they tried to unwind that sum, I mean, the market went very negative, like very quickly, with very little action on the Fed's part. So I don't know what the solution is when you go down this road and you solve everything by writing checks. You take away the risk from the marketplace. That's it's a lot to think about. That's, you know, whenever recently when I've done a report, I really thought, well, this is probably the last one. And then there's all this new stuff to consider. And
Yeah.
you know, basically that's what I've spent the last few months doing, is what I always do, studying for my own benefit to make correct decisions and then decide to share them. Because I think, wow, I've got to try to understand that all these other categories that are not connected to California real estate.
Mhm.
It's connected to national policies on all different kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. I'm going to be fascinated what they do with income taxes this year, by the end of the year,
Mhm.
what the rates will be.
One thing that I've thought about is that as a result, in my opinion, it feels like as a result of what happened in 2008, that like the Fed and other government agencies are trying to react more fast and more radically in order to keep things from becoming a big issue like it did back then. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they're reacting, but when you do that, there's a price. So
Mhm.
when we wrote the report, maybe it was 2020, 2019, one of the big concerns was the subprime car debt and the delinquencies of that. And also the corporate paper was, you know, pretty aggressively not good, subprime. And that was the big concern, was, okay, it's not going to be the house loans that are going to cause a problem. It's going to be the, you know, the crashing of the car paper and the commercial paper. And when the coronavirus hit, who ended up stepping up and taking the risk? The Fed did.
Mhm.
And so if you're on the sideline going, wow, that's pretty cool. We thought that was going to be a problem. In other words, if you take the risk out of the marketplace, people take more risk. So it's a fascinating time that we are in right now. And that's why I'm going to be really excited to read Dalio's book and try to comprehend it and share my take on it, because that's a guy that studied things I haven't even thought about. You know, most of what I try to study is something that's probably happened within my lifetime.
Mhm.
You know, well, he said when you're an investor, you have to look at trends even if they've never happened in your lifetime, because they may be repetitive and will still happen later in your life. And that's what he studies. So he goes
Mhm.
back centuries and says, okay, let's take a look at why Europe or England lost its, you know, pound is no longer the world currency, and the Dutch or the whatever. And then he does all these charts and it's repetitive. And then he plugs in the United States and you start looking at the patterns and just like, holy cow. Well, what are the ramifications of that? I mean, it's over my head, but if I read it, I probably have to read it 3 times to go, okay, I got it.
Mhm.
But I'd love to interview him. We will try to do that. I would love to interview him because I think what he has done is really kind of an amazing gift that I think he's doing it for the right reasons. He does not need to sell a book.
Yeah.
He's really trying to help investors understand this is game-changing stuff that we're doing right now.
Mhm. Okay, maybe one last question. Somebody had asked a question about rents. Do you have a feeling one way about the impact of all this on rents in the near term?
I don't. I mean, I think some of that's controlled now by, depending, I guess, where you are, somewhat by rent control, but the market also controls rents. I think you will have a migration out of some areas to other states. When their rent is so high, they can't have a life and they can move to another place and own a home and have one. That'll happen. That will start happening. So there's just, this is an interesting year. There's a line in a movie, Godfather 3. Every time I thought I was getting out, they dragged me back in. That's kind of what all this stuff has done for me. Is I thought, okay, I've written my last report and I'm great with that, and then all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of new stuff I have to understand to be a real estate investor. So that's what this year for me is about, is to learn all those things. And fortunately, I have an audience I get to share them with. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, let me ask actually one last question. I saw somebody add a question about migration. I see different reports about migration, and to me, it seems a little unclear how, and I hear lots of anecdotal friends of ours, et cetera, that are moving and leaving the state. Maybe from a more educated perspective, do you have an idea as to how much net migration we're seeing leave the state of California and how much of an impact you feel like that's going to have on the Southern California market?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things I mentioned is when California has no population gain now, none. There's so many migrating people out that it counters the birth number over death. You do have immigration coming in, but it doesn't counter those numbers. So you're literally your only population gain category is birth over death. So more babies being born than people dying, but that's now being countered by that many more adults leaving. It's not a huge percentage, but it's the wrong direction, if you know what I mean. The reason, why did California become twice as expensive as other areas? Because it was the migration mega place, man. It got tons of people for many years. And the demand was such that now it's reversing. And so the biggest problem, this is something we did an interview with economists recently. I'm sorry, accountants, and talking about tax rates. So in preparation, one of the reasons I like the radio show is I work really hard for the interview. And I found an interesting statistic. What percentage of households pay 40% of the tax bill for California? I didn't know I was going to come up with this percentage. 0.5% of households pay 40% of the state income tax in California.
Wow.
Yeah. So when you raise taxes, guess what? I mean, that's the group you're going to go after. But they, if it gets too high, they have options, right? It's like, yeah. So I think we're in we're in a quandary. We're going to need to create income to keep promises. And the only people you are going to chase either have really big incomes or a lot of assets. That's not it's not a good way. You can do those policies, but the net result would mean maybe you have a lot of migration out of businesses and very wealthy people. So California's got to be very careful about that. That to me is my biggest concern, is that you create policies where you are having an exiting of the wealthy that pay a big part of the tab.
They should read the book Atlas Shrugged.
Yep. I've got so many books to read this year already. And then I discovered, Aaron bought me a set of the little things you put in your ear. And now I'm listening to books as I walk, and oh man, it's great.
Let's see. Well, I want to give you guys an opportunity. I know that you guys have a boot camp coming up, and I wanted to just ask if you could share that. I know that a lot of people are looking for input on how they can invest their money. I don't know if it was you or if Joey was going to be the one who was going to share about that, but we'd love to just give everybody an opportunity to know about that upcoming event.
Well, what I think what I'd like for them to do is, I'll give you Joey's email, and I'll then explain what it is. Joey@thenorrisgroup.com. So Joey@thenorrisgroup.com. What we're going to do on Saturday is give the first segment of the timing report. So it'll be between 2 or 3 hours of this type of information, more specific about where we are in the marketplace, where we are in history as far as, okay, this is how far Orange County goes up in price, or Orange County is close or not close to the end. Do that same thing with San Diego, LA, Riverside, Sacramento, San Jose. So you get a picture of where we are. When we try to figure out at the end of a cycle, we basically have 5 sets of comps that we look at to say, this is like we're appraising the state of California, how close to the end are you? So that they'll end up, that's what we'll discuss. And then we'll talk really specifically about what this year and how it's going to unfold and what we're going to look for. So we're going to share 3 more times this year in this event. So the cost of signing up for that is $350. And you also get access to our website that has all the stuff I've ever written about the education of a real estate investor. And that's how I know, for instance, I look at charts to make decisions what I do tomorrow. And so that's really important, because I don't waste time. If foreclosure charts are super high, I didn't go to Florida door knocking foreclosures. It's worthless. They were upside down. I made a relationship with somebody that controlled inventory and bought properties the next day, literally, because I was going after exactly the right inventory and the right person that controlled it. So, but on Saturday, we're going to talk about what's going to unfold this year and how it impacts California investors. And one of the suggestions will be, if you want to go to take a look at Florida, we'll hold an event in March. But let's start with, I think everybody that's ever gone to our timing seminars think, wow, that was so worth going to. So that's what they're going to have. 25% of that will be given this Saturday from 9 till noon. That's the time frame, open for questions. And I don't think there'll be anybody sad that they win.
This was a couple of years ago, and that pretty much looks like today.
Well, I took a look at the projection that we had. We projected 40 trillion in certain time period. That was a 10-year projection. So this year we said it would be at 27 trillion on its way to 40, and we'll be at 28 without the 1.9 trillion. So by next year we'll be at 31 or so on its way to 50. And you already know we had 2% mortgage rates.
Yeah, I just refinanced my house at 2.75.
Wow.
So yeah,
Well,
it's crazy.
now, I want you to think about the craziness of writing that title before it happens.
No, I remember. Yeah, it was aggressive. It was aggressive. Well, it gave me hope. I mean, I don't want some of the things that are part of that, but I mean, if you own rental property, I'm refinancing a bunch of rental properties, and it increased my cash flow substantially with lower interest rates. So
Yeah, you know what's, I'm going to mention something here because this is important. I think right now we're at a really difficult time in society. I think there's a lot of people that they feel like they haven't had a chance at some of the goodies. Real estate can reach across the aisle right now. We're talking about doing a $15,000 tax credit. The problem with that is it costs $15,000 a pop, and there's no reason for it. So, and I've talked to Doug Duncan about this, and I'm hoping I get an audience in front of either Congress or Fannie and Freddie and FHA, which he has gotten me there before 3 times. But I hope they create a nothing down loan program. And what that would do is allow a lot of people, and they have to qualify, but they don't have to have a down payment. So that's the same as 15,000 without the cost. So you get a chance to own a home. You have an interest rate that starts with a 2. How you make that safe, because that's the biggest problem. You want that foreclosure chart going off the charts? No. So in this loan program, what you do is you make one foreclosure law for all 50 states. So forget about it's going to take 4 years to foreclose. Here's the way it goes. If you don't make payments for 6 months, there's a sale that's held. The opening bid has nothing to do with the principal. It has to do with the back payments, which means that in Florida, if you have a 300 grand mortgage at 2.75% and you don't make a payment for 6 months, I mean, what's the opening bid? 8 grand? Somebody bids 8 grand, they take over the principal, the lender's made current, and on we go. That would reach across the aisle. Real estate has a chance to reach across the aisle and change a lot of people's attitudes and lives. It really does. Because I changed my life. When I owned a house, man, I felt like it was part of the deal. I really did. And 3 years later, I owned the home free and clear because I got a chance to have some equity build up. And a light went on. I said, wow, what if I own 3 of these things? And I did. I owned 3 of those things in a stretch when real estate went up. And then when we bought that 5-bedroom home, we bought it cash. And I'm 28 years old and I don't have a house payment. It's unbelievable. How did I get that chance? I couldn't qualify for a loan. I took over a VA loan subject to. So real estate can make a difference right now in the mood of the country. And I really think it can do its part without any cost. Because would you bid on a rental that you could get a 2.75% mortgage rate that's fixed for 30 years? If have a down payment of 8 grand? Probably.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. So what are the odds you're going to have a foreclosure glut come out of that loan program? There's none.
Yeah, there'd be an enormous savings of just.
Well, you'd save 15,000 if you did 1 million new houses sales and you save 15 grand a house. That would be nice. 15,000 times a lot of money. So anyway, I don't know if we'll ever get an audience, but I hope we do, because I think real estate could be do a big part in reaching across the aisle and saying, we get it. You know, you and I who have assets, we enjoy that stuff every day, right? You know, you look at your value of your house over a course of a year and you go, wow, that's pretty exciting. You know, if you own 20 of them, oh my gosh, you know, you're way richer than you thought. If you own none of that stuff, that's not happy.
Well, you're just left behind.
Yeah. Yeah. You get further behind and you don't know how to recover that. So that's what I'm saying. This gives some people a shot. And I think it'll change their attitude. Just a thought.